Can you tell me what happened to the dinosaurs?
There was a big earthquake.
Yes, the weather changed and they faded away.
Okay, and I think that a giant meteor hit the Earth and it suffocated all of them.
I think the atmosphere changed and they just died away. I think the small mammals ate their eggs.
The dinosaurs vanished in a cataclysmic event. There was a polar shift.
They died.
Can you tell me how they died?
I don't know, I must have been asleep in class that day.
Dinosaurs, a subject of intrigue for both young and old. Over the past several years, dinosaur mania has attracted countless enthusiastic supporters. Museums and national parks all over the world display full-scale models and reconstructions of what these great creatures might have looked like in the past. Books and publications fascinate people of all ages, and the sale of souvenirs, from toys to t-shirts, games to gadgets, have become a profitable business for many entrepreneurs. But the mystery remains. What were they? When did they live? Where did they live? Why are they no longer with us today? These are the questions that have been the subject of intrigue for many generations for both the scientist and the layperson. Is it possible to know the answers? We can make observations from the fossil record from all over the world that the dinosaurs lived in the past. We can pick up their fossilized remains and examine them. The question that everyone has is what happened to them? What brought about the death of the dinosaur? The name dinosaur comes from two Greek words, Deinos meaning terrible and sauros meaning lizard. Dinosaur, terrible lizard. The word was first coined in 1841 as an attempt to describe the giant reptilian fossilized bones which had been found in Britain. Soon, reports of more dinosaur fossils came from other scientists all over the world. What were these great creatures that lived in prehistoric times? Why were they so big? What happened to them? Since dinosaur remains were first discovered in the mid-1800s, numerous locations throughout the world have become well-known sites for investigating the dinosaur dilemma. It is in these areas that dinosaur remains have been preserved in the layers of the earth. Drumheller, Alberta, and its Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology, found in the Red Deer River Valley in western Canada, is one such location. This area has attracted hundreds of scientists from all over the world who have come to this region searching for clues to help understand more about the dinosaurs. Dr. Emlyn Coster, director of the Tyrrell Museum.
More dinosaur species, greater quality, more diversity, and so on are known from Dinosaur Provincial Park than any other area that we know of. Other areas come close, like the Gobi Desert of China and Montana and so on, but in those terms, Dinosaur Provincial Park is a very special, unique place. The Tyrrell Museum then fits into that by being an institution that is dedicated to the study and interpretation of the history of life on Earth, and of course dinosaurs are a big chapter of that history.
In order to understand where dinosaurs fit into the evolutionary worldview of the origin and history of life, we could look at a typical chart illustrating the progression of life from simple to complex over time. Some scientists speculate that life first appeared hundreds of millions of years ago from non-living material. They believe that single-celled creatures were the first life forms to develop. Single-celled organisms, they say, developed into multicellular creatures, which eventually evolved into fish. Fish evolved into amphibians. Amphibians became reptiles, and eventually evolved into dinosaurs. Then reptiles became birds, mammals, and finally, man.
Dinosaurs fit into the scene between about 225 to 65 million years ago, which is a long time ago in human terms. It means that 60 million years separated the last dinosaur from the first human-like animal. But the age of the dinosaurs is in the full scale of the immensity of Earth history, a very recent phenomenon.
Although the question of when dinosaurs lived is based largely on assumption, scientists are much more precise when it comes to suggesting what the climatic conditions and environmental surroundings were like at the time that the dinosaurs flourished on this planet. The fossil record provides overwhelming evidence that the Earth was much different at the time that the dinosaurs lived than it is today.
Well, the way this part of Alberta looked back 70 million years ago when the dinosaurs were at the end of their long chapter of existence was completely opposite to what we have today. As you see in the Badlands, this is now an area of erosion. It's a semi-arid area with cactus and wildlife that is indicative of the semi-arid climate. Back at the time of the dinosaurs, the geography was completely different. This was a low subtropical coastal plain with a lot of luxuriant vegetation on it, types of plants that we find elsewhere in the world today that we have featured in the Paleo Conservatory at the Tyrrell Museum.
Roger Oakland, author, lecturer, and researcher, has been interested in the mystery surrounding dinosaurs for a number of years.
There was a climate different than it is today. Scientists know that in the past the climate was much different at the time the dinosaurs lived, because dinosaur fossils are found literally all over the planet, from pole to pole. And they're associated with the fossilized remains of a vast amount of subtropical plants and animal varieties which have been fossilized along with the dinosaur.
But the biggest mystery of all is centered around the question of how and why the dinosaurs became extinct. Ever since their fossilized remains were first discovered, there has been much speculation regarding their demise. Some suggest they were unable to compete with other creatures that were more intelligent than they were. Others believe they died out gradually because their body design was not able to cope with gradual changing environmental conditions. Some have even argued that the dinosaurs' extinction was the result of indigestion. They gassed themselves into oblivion. Methane gas, a byproduct of digestion, created a greenhouse effect, or a global warming, which eventually led to their extinction.
The only clues that scientists have to try and resolve the dinosaur mystery are the fossils and the layers of the earth where these fossils are buried. I hold in my hand here a dinosaur bone which has been fossilized. You can actually see the marrow within the bone that has been fossilized. Dinosaur experts spend a good deal of their time digging in these layers and examining the fossils in an attempt to piece together the puzzle to try to understand the mystery behind their disappearance.
The famous hoodoos of southern Alberta are unique geological formations formed as a result of erosion.
What we see in the hoodoos is at the base we get a dirty brown layer of shale. Now what that shale was deposited in was an inland sea, basically the northern extension of the Gulf of Mexico. So at the time the Gulf of Mexico and the Arctic Ocean met in the middle part of the continent, Saskatchewan, Nebraska, the Dakotas, all were underwater. The hoodoos then, what they mark is the retreat of this sea. It's moving to the east and land is beginning to build out. On top of that dirty brown layer is a cleaner layer of gray sand. That's the beach sand as the sea is moving out. Then above the hoodoo, there's a hard cap rock, a very hard sandstone, probably deposited in rivers along the beach front. Then as erosion happens, this hard rock does not erode very fast. The soft sandstones and shales below erode much more rapidly, and you get the formation of a hoodoo.
Most scientists believe that these layers were formed over millions of years of time. The theory is that each strata, or layer, represents the gradual deposition by an erosional process taking millions of years. During these long periods of time, it is believed that plants and animals lived and died, and their remains were preserved as fossils.
The usual way in which we find dinosaur remains is actually disarticulated. The finding of a complete skeleton with the head, the body, the legs, everything in place is actually extremely rare. The majority of finds are isolated teeth, isolated jaws, isolated toe bones. Dinosaurs are mostly found in a disarticulated manner because of the conditions they were preserved in. When the animal died, scavengers, other meat eaters, water, rivers would begin to move the carcass around and destroy it. So it takes an incredibly rare set of circumstances to preserve a complete and perfect skeleton.
More and more scientists are beginning to acknowledge that the reason we have fossils formed in the past is because of a sudden burial brought about by some local catastrophe. And in order to explain why fossils are found literally all over the planet, the claim is often made that there have been millions of local catastrophes in millions of places over millions of years.
A lot of times, the preservation, the burial of these animals has to do with water in some way. The carcasses are carried, the bones are carried down rivers and streams, and one thing that's involved in this often is trees, tree roots, branches. They have a definite effect on the preservation, especially if it was at a flood stage and, say, logs were being carried down, you form a log jam. And sometimes either bones or parts of carcasses or complete carcasses are caught in a log jam and preserved.
One geologist I talked to said the reason so many dinosaurs had been found buried in one particular area was that they'd all drowned together in the same spot as they were attempting to cross a river in a flood season. The first dinosaur tripped and drowned, the second tripped over the first, the third over the first two, and so on until eventually all 300 had tripped over each other and drowned in the same location.
We have an animal on display at the museum in which the tree trunk was found and the roots were found, and this animal is almost entwined in the roots of this tree. The carcass had floated down the river and been caught and entwined, and the whole thing was just preserved very quickly in sediment and left that way permanently, and it's been displayed that way because it's a very interesting phenomenon.
The interesting thing is, no matter where you go to investigate the death of the dinosaur, whether in Canada, the United States, Brazil, Mongolia, or even the Antarctic, the same explanation is often given, that they were wiped out by a series of local floods. Until the past decade, very few scientists have been willing to acknowledge that there may have been one major event that destroyed them.
Recently, increasing numbers of dinosaur experts have suggested that gradual extinction does not answer the puzzling questions of how fossils were formed or how the layers surrounding the dinosaur remains were deposited. There is growing evidence to suggest that a sudden major global catastrophe occurred in the past, which wiped out not only the dinosaurs, but many other forms of life. We know that the process of fossilization requires sudden burial of life forms to make preservation possible. Fossil records around the world reveal billions of fish preserved in a moment of time. Clams with their valves shut. Reptilian creatures and mammals have all been found buried in swimming positions, along with dinosaurs. Some suggest that catastrophic conditions for burial were happening simultaneously all over the planet, not spread out over hundreds of millions of years.
Many scientists are putting forward ideas on dinosaur extinction these days. Everybody's got their own idea. It's interesting to me to note how many of these ideas are what we would call catastrophic ideas, where things are happening to the Earth on a grand scale, far beyond what's happening in the world today. As a geologist, I'm what we call a catastrophist. I do hold to the idea that the Earth has been altered in the past by processes with rates, scales, and intensities far beyond what's happening today. So I'm comfortable with some of these dinosaur extinction theories.
In a location near Huxley, Alberta, a complete dinosaur has been found encased in 80 tons of ironstone. Ironstone, which was a material that was once hot and molten. The skin imprints are there. The foot imprints have been preserved, indicating that this creature was buried in a sudden burial.
So the evidence does seem to point to sudden extinction. But is there any way of knowing when this took place? Most conventional geologists are confident that they can pinpoint the extinction of the dinosaur to an exact moment in the Earth's history.
The evidence for that sudden disappearance is at many, many sites now around the world. We find in rocks that have been dated precisely at 64.9 to 65 million years ago, the moment where we always knew that dinosaurs became extinct, and other animals too.
But how do scientists determine these dates? No scientist was there when it actually happened. What evidence do they have to prove the actual date of extinction scientifically?
When scientists first reached the Drumheller region in the interior of the western United States, radiometric dating had not been discovered. It hadn't been thought of. So the ways they had to figure out how old things were by doing calculations. They would look at a layer of sandstone and say, well, we've got here a foot of sandstone. In a normal system, sandstone is deposited at, I don't know, maybe an inch a year. You then multiply this out. These estimates were extremely rough.
The concept of determining when and how long dinosaurs lived on this planet was proposed over 150 years ago when geologists established the geological chart. Roger Oakland explains.
The idea of the dinosaurs living 225 million to 65 million years ago was first proposed by James Hutton and Charles Lyell back in the 1700s. They proposed that these layers were formed gradually over millions of years of time, and in the layers we should find the representatives of life developing and evolving from simple to complex. And so they established a chart which they called the geologic column. And they arbitrarily assigned the age of dinosaurs at 225 million to 65 million years ago. No one was there to make that observation. It's simply an arbitrary assignment.
The geologic column is thought to represent this progression of life from the simple up through the complex. As we start at the surface and go down, we encounter what's known as the dinosaur era. Below that is the time supposedly before dinosaurs evolved. Whenever a scientist finds a rock layer with dinosaur fossils in it, he assigns it to that dinosaur era.
Some scientists try to project the idea that the end of the dinosaur era has now been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt by the use of radiometric dating, and that radiometric dating is as accurate as a Swiss watch. But how do we know that this is true?
The technique that we use to determine the age of dinosaurs is called radiometric dating. And this is based on the fact that the Earth contains radioactive elements. And a radioactive element is simply an element that is unstable. It's continually breaking down. It's losing parts of the atom, are being fired out, and it's becoming a new kind of element. One of the common ones used to date dinosaurs is the potassium-argon method. If we take into a chemical laboratory, and the technology and the equipment necessary for this is awe-inspiring, and we simply measure the amount of potassium to the amount of argon and run not a simple equation, but a very complex equation, out at the other end of your computer pops out the age.
Radiometric dating attempts to date the origin of volcanic materials, not the actual bones themselves. But there are some problems with this technique. Volcanic rocks formed in Hawaii less than 200 years ago give an age of formation by radiometric dating of hundreds of millions of years to billions of years. How can we say that volcanic rocks formed in the unknown past can be dated accurately?
For the scientific method to function properly, theories must be constantly evaluated by testing them against the actual observable evidence. Today, there is overwhelming evidence coming forward indicating that some of our old cherished ideas about dinosaurs need to be reevaluated.
There is no question whatsoever that dinosaurs lived at a time when the climate of the Earth was much different than it is today. The mystery is, why was the climate different then than it is now? Some have suggested that at the time the dinosaurs lived, the Earth's environment was somewhat like a greenhouse.
The glass windows of a greenhouse allow long-wave radiation from the sun to pass through, which is then trapped within the greenhouse, providing the environment for vigorous growth. It is interesting that in the biblical account of origins in the book of Genesis, there is reference to the creation of a condition that certainly could be described as a greenhouse effect. In Genesis 1, verses 6 and 7, we read, "And God said, Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so." So according to the Bible, the original earth was surrounded by a layer of water, an atmosphere separating the water above from the water below. The presence of a water canopy surrounding the original earth would have provided a greenhouse effect. Long-wave radiation from the sun would pass through the water layer and be trapped inside the canopy, creating subtropical greenhouse-like conditions all over the earth. As well, a watery layer surrounding the earth would assist in preventing short-wave radiation from penetrating the earth's atmosphere and harming life. It would protect life much like the ozone layer does today. As a result, various life forms, including dinosaurs, could have lived longer in this protective environment and grown larger.
It's interesting to speculate, even though we can't be dogmatic, that since reptiles today, the large ones, tend to live much longer than humans, they might live for several hundred years, and reptiles exhibit an interesting growth pattern. They continue to grow as long as they live, and so the oldest one would be the largest one. I wonder if perhaps the large dinosaurs really weren't very old dinosaurs and had continued to grow their entire lives.
The canopy model not only helps to understand why dinosaur remains have been found from pole to pole, but it also gives us an explanation for why some of them grew to be so large.
But the biggest mystery still remains. What happened to the dinosaurs? Did they die out gradually, or were they wiped out by a sudden event?
Basically, the thinking, which is ongoing, it's a very dynamic question in earth science. Dinosaurs died out either because of sudden catastrophic reasons, the collision with the Earth of an asteroid or of a comet, which radically changed and suddenly changed the Earth's atmosphere and biosphere, and or a more gradualistic type of thinking that the dinosaurs and other concurrent animals were on the decline in any case.
When we deal with the mystery of why dinosaurs went extinct, there's actually two main areas of thought. It's very hotly debated, and the various scientists hold these opinions very, very strongly. The first one, which is getting a lot of media coverage now, is catastrophic extinction, something like a meteorite slamming into the Atlantic Ocean, causing huge clouds of dust, shutting off the sun, and killing the dinosaurs over a few months or a year or so at the most. The other area is a much more gradualistic approach, which deals with subtle combinations of ecological change, maybe the planet beginning to heat up very slightly, some of the plant material dying out so the plant eaters could no longer feed.
The newest extinction theory suggests that dinosaurs and countless other forms of life were wiped out when a comet or an asteroid or series of asteroids smashed into the Earth. Such an impact would trigger tremendous geological upheavals all over the world. Massive volumes of ash and hot magma would be poured out on the Earth. If the impact occurred in the ocean, tidal wave activity would sweep back and forth across the land masses, suddenly burying and destroying all forms of life in its path.
Scientists must formulate their ideas about dinosaur extinction based upon what they observe today. But it is interesting to note that this new theory sounds very much like what the Bible describes in the Genesis account of a worldwide flood.
According to the biblical account, a global catastrophic event occurred in the days of Noah. The fountains of the great deep were broken up. The Earth's crust fractured all over the entire surface of the planet. All over the globe, hot molten lava, volcanic ash, and superheated water spewed onto the surface of the earth. Simultaneous to the volcanic devastation, the Bible states that the windows of heaven were opened. A cosmic catastrophe rained down from above, perhaps associated with heavenly objects like a comet or an asteroid slamming into the earth. Land masses rose and sank in violent geological upheavals. Hundreds of cubic miles of water would be quickly displaced, causing violent erosional forces that would rip canyons and rifts in the earth. Tidal waves would sweep back and forth over the land as the waters returned from off the earth continually. Layer after layer would be deposited, mixed with the buried remains of plants and animals.
As an Earth scientist, I would not claim that I can prove any particular model of Earth history. I happen to be a catastrophist. I believe that the processes which laid down the rocks of the Earth's crust were dynamic, catastrophic processes, but I can't prove that, nor can I disprove the other.
There are cases of dinosaurs and other kinds of animals that have been buried under hundreds of feet of volcanic ash, killed instantly. The ash then covers them immediately.
In Dinosaur Provincial Park, we have a bone bed of the genus Centrosaurus, a big frilled ceratopsian dinosaur, where we have evidence of up to 300 animals dying and being preserved at an instant due to mass drowning as they tried to cross the river in flood.
I'm convinced that if the Earth's history was visited by a water catastrophe, then we would expect the rocks themselves to give evidence of having been deposited catastrophically, rapidly. They would evidently be covering vast portions of the continents. They would be regional in scope as opposed to local in scope. They would show evidence of erosion on a scale far beyond what's happening today. We would see these things. And when we look at the rocks, what's interesting is that we do find those things.
And so the question remains, what happened to the dinosaurs? No scientist can reproduce what happened or be 100% sure, but the evidence clearly points toward a worldwide global catastrophe at a time when the Earth was subtropical from pole to pole. And maybe not that long ago. Perhaps we are being too hasty if we dismiss the biblical worldview.
For more information or literature, write to Oakland Communications, Post Office Box 27239, Santa Ana, California, 92799. Or in Canada, write to Oakland Communications, Post Office Box 1160, Eston, Saskatchewan, SOL 1AO.